Hi, everyone, and welcome. We have quite a good audience today. You might notice that this feels just like a Zoom meeting, and it kind of is, but there are a few distinct differences. For one, for everyone's convenience and listening pleasure, we cannot hear your voice. We cannot see you, but we can communicate with you. And the way to do that is in the Q&A button just below in the Zoom bar. We greatly appreciate your questions along the way. Easy questions will be answered immediately in chat by me. Hard questions will pass to our panelists at the end of the discussion for the final 10 minutes or so. Really hard questions will be rewarded with a scheduled meeting. As I kick off the show with our video, which we just watched, take a moment to practice the Q&A box. Introduce yourself. Let us know where you're watching the show from, what time zone, what city, etc. We'd be happy to hear from you. All right, let me move on to introduce our panelist and host today. He is David Nedowin. He is a co-founder of Scope AR and our Chief Customer Officer. That means he was with us at the beginning 12 plus years ago, and his experience in augmented reality is focused almost exclusively on making customers successful. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome everyone, and David, take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Robert. Yeah, great pleasure to be here today. This is our second webinar that we've done. The last one was around the aerospace industry, some of our great customers there and partners. Today is fantastic. We've got an amazing panel in the medical device space. And you mentioned I've been involved for 12 years. Well, I can tell you that the folks that we have on the panel here have been involved in this area for just as long. So a lot of experience. We're going to try and do, sort of a fireside chat conversation. So we'll do some introductions, just ask some kind of opening questions. But the idea of this is to be just really collaborative, kind of share ideas. Sometimes maybe even you challenge some ideas. This worked for us, that didn't. But let's keep it as a conversation, and hopefully we get some really great questions out of this. The whole idea being that hopefully the audience will pick up some ideas that they can learn from, maybe some ideas that they can implement, and love to obviously share with those as well as we go down the road. So first of all, starting with some introductions, Dr. Judi Haberkorn. So Judi is the Senior Director of Operations at Integrated DNA Technologies. It's based in Miami. She's tons of academics and experience there, Doctor of Philosophy from the University of Delaware and multiple master's degrees from St. Xavier University, and a really strong track record in general and digitally transformation process, and leading medical companies like Beckman Coulter Diagnostics and Vitas Health, and obviously now at Integrated DNA Technologies. So focused as a global operations leader, and just really driving innovation, which is shown through a lot of the augmented reality work that we're seeing here. So welcome, Judi. Thank you for being here today. It's been great, obviously, working over the last number of years with you. And so maybe just a bit of an opening question for you, because I obviously we've had connections for some time. Maybe you can just share with everybody a little bit about the general evolution or the journey as to where you started and kind of the progress that you've made over that time, just in a short kind of overview of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for the warm introduction, and really always happy to spend time with my Scope AR family, as I love to call you all. So history-wise, I'll briefly have a history of transformation of traditional training methods to some form of a virtual format. Took that experience in history and moved it into corporate America, into the medical device space, and started my journey with Scope AR back in 2018. Feels unbelievable to say that it was nearly 5 years ago, but it was every bit of that. And we started on a journey where I looked at the trajectory of where we were going as a company with a number of exciting new product launches. These were for complex medical devices. We're talking devices that can be anything from the size of a Keurig coffee maker to the size of an entire massive room in a laboratory. This instrumentation can have 20,000 unique parts. So it's extremely complex instrumentation. And back in 2018, I was looking at the future roadmap for the medical diagnostics company that I worked for, and I saw a number of new product launches headed our way. And I knew that our traditional method of training, in which we would fly both customers as well as engineers all over the country to training facilities to become trained over several weeks periods of time was not going to be sustainable, scalable, or tenable given the aggressive product launch future that was ahead of me. So with some partners at our parent company, began to look at vendors across the industry for what is next, what was coming in training. And augmented reality was definitely back 5 years ago, was one of those absolutely cutting edge technologies that few people were employing. And it was the first thing that I could see that could actually possibly mimic what we were flying people around the country to do. And so we began on a journey mid 2018. We evaluated a number of vendors, inclusive, of course, of Scope AR, as well as many of the competitors. And the early decision point of choosing Scope AR came down to several factors. Number one, of course, the technology. But number two, it was the customer service. To date, I have never in my professional history, and I've worked a long time, have worked with a vendor that has defined partnership better than Scope AR. And so the third angle or the third decision point to choose Scope AR early on was the joke was it had to be easy enough for Judi to do it. I am not an IT person by background. I am not a coder. And so when I could get into the technology and create something relatively simply, I knew that that would be a scalable definition and product for us to take. So that was the sort of early decisions point, David, back in 2018 that started us on our journey. And, you know, I can continue a little more of the story if that's helpful or pivot to another point if you'd like.
No, that's awesome. I think you've actually brought up some things that we'll continue to talk about. So thank you for that. And yeah, thanks for the kind words too. We value all of our relationships with our partners and customers, and it's just a pleasure for us to work with folks like yourself. So yeah, thank you very much. So next, I'm going to introduce Dr. William Harding. So Distinguished Technical Fellow at Medtronic Advanced Technologies. I apologize. I am not going to list every one of your accomplishments on your background because we would actually take up the whole time on the webinar, but some key highlights: Master of Computer Science and PhD emphasizing technology integration, 41 years of industry experience and 25 plus years at Medtronic, along with publishing 3 academic books on topics of healthcare technology, blockchain, mobile medicine, all sorts of papers, and holder of numerous technology-related patents and trade secrets, as well as being on the chair of Medtronic's Technical Fellows Organization and so forth and so on. It continues to go on and on. So it's a pleasure for us to have you here today. Thank you very much for joining us. One question for you to start with, you know, when you look at the journey from evaluating technology to getting it to a point of being kind of production use cases, you know, what are some of the key things, obviously based on your experience, that you've learned to look at, to consider, maybe a checklist of sorts that you might have that go, yes, as we go through these gates, I know that it's going to be something that leadership is going to support, and then we're going to move into sort of that next stage with it. Do you have something like that you could share?
Yes, and I appreciate the introduction, but yeah, they're actually, we have a fairly solid plan on how we implement technology. And to kind of give you a little bit background on that, I've worked in, before AR was considered AR, when I worked in the military contract type works, and we were doing things with the Defense Mapping Agency and overlaid vector information. We didn't call it AR at the time, but it was like, wow, you know, this would really be, you know, a superstar technology, you know, if we were able to implement this in this, and this. So once I had the opportunity to work with Medtronic and start thinking about things like medical device manufacturing, you know, working with surgeons and so on, you know, we started to then think, well, how could we use this technology? So when you see the emergence of things like the Google Glass, you know, and other minimal, you know, let's say entry-level AR systems, it occurred to us there would be a lot of opportunities, everything from onboarding, training, sustainability, telepresence, you know, Dr. Proctor and whatnot. But we really had, the first thing we had to do was get out of the mindset that this is a game. It's not a game. It's technology a lot of people use for gaming technology, and it's also not an Indiegogo Kickstarter type scenario where you throw out an idea and hope it sticks and you have no idea how to execute. So we really had to go about this with a very solid plan in mind. And one of the things I like to emphasize is when we're thinking about implementing new technology, the value proposition is often very clear. And I'll use an example that if I'm doing process acceptance testing, normally send a team of people out to Italy, where I've got to then spend 2.5 weeks to run through the processes and say, well, you know what, if I send them on HoloLens, and now I'm able to create a telepresence with the people in Italy, the manufacturer of the product we're implementing, and then actually run through the process acceptance testing using this technology. It's not theoretical. We did that, and it saved us weeks and weeks of time. It saved us tons of money. And we found a new way when you think about the COVID issues that were going on relative to travel and socialization to still maintain and get the job done. But again, that wasn't the best way to implement things. That had a clear value proposition. But when it came to saying, hey, I've got a great idea, going to the GM or my engineering managers and saying, this is what I want to implement, you can't really just do that. You don't just pop out of a dark room saying, hey, I've solved all the mysteries. You've got to start thinking of all the relevant stakeholders. You got to think about how technology is actually implemented. And so if you think in terms of any technology, not just AR, first things first, you really have to engage the right stakeholders. You can't just pop this thing in, start designing, start developing it, getting ready to implement, and then pull your IT or your quality or regulatory people. You have to engage the individuals early on. They're relevant. I'm not saying everybody and not too many cooks, spoiling the whole meal basically, but the relevant ones, getting key individuals. And there was an element that was super important to us. But we also had to really implement some methods, and everything from, as example, we'll say any sort of hyper training or any sort of things that we were doing around as far as design thinking methods to really understand, what is the value proposition? What are we trying to do? We're not trying to solve 10,000 things at a time. But when it came to actually implementing and deploying these solutions, also start thinking in terms of, end of life, all the other aspects. Those were the processes we need to really consider. And we do follow those process plans. But one of the biggest issues that we were faced with was, this is great technology, but it's nothing but a wearable display screen if you don't have the content. And a lot of people just assume that if you drop this headset in production, everything would work magically. And it doesn't that way. So if I have an operator who has to look at an RF ablation lead and said, this is how you assemble it, to put the digital twin, to put the digital content overlaid on it was critical. So to create that digital content such that it was relevant and could be used for FDA approved systems was super critical. So the big point I get to is, just like I say often with the Indiegogo and Kickstarter scenarios, you have a great idea, but you have no idea how to execute it. Laying this plan out, thinking in terms of everything from assessment of technology to, as far as making decision making to adoption, design, let's say deployment and adoption effectively, but integration, sustainability, end of life. Those are some of the key points you really have to have in mind before you put this in place. So hopefully that gives you a quick overview of it.
Oh, very good. I mean, you've touched on so many key points there in terms of like what that process looks like. And we all have to think about it, because putting technology in place just for the sake of having technology doesn't solve any problems, and it doesn't create any value for the organization or the workers, right? So
exactly.
There's a lot there that we can talk a little bit more about. But before we do that, I want to make sure I introduced Jeff DiDomenico. So one of my favorite people to work with, been over at Johnson & Johnson for 5 years. IT senior technical product manager for XR, and comes with Master of Business from Delaware Valley University, experienced technology innovator with a history of working in healthcare and financial service industries, and really specializes in the deployment of new technologies and focused on the transformation of how we do business and how organizations operate. Jeff, you're obviously, your organization has so many different verticals within it at J&J. You sort of touch on all parts of that from the IT side of things. Just curious, when you start, and I know this happens all the time when we have sort of meetings with maybe new partners, new organizations. You can get 10 people around in a table and start talking about what AR can support and the different use cases, and you've got 10 different ideas. You have this large organization with so many different verticals and business areas. Maybe just like funneling that into, was there something that you've you can say these were the most relevant use cases that as we started to filter it out, we know that we're going to continue to focus on because they have that maybe immediate or high value impact, something that you can share from that experience?
Yeah, for sure. And thanks for the intro, Dave. Thank you for that, for sure. So yeah, it's interesting because, and I will begin this story by giving a shout out to a couple of colleagues of mine, because without them, we would never be where we are with AR technology, without them sort of bringing this use case to us. So Paul Kessig and Gize Abanez, Paul being a commercial education manager at J&J in our MedTech education space, and then Gize also working in technology and IT, but in supply chain, who had just sort of in incubating new technology, decided to go out and do a proof of concept with the Scope AR application. So I have to give a shout out to both of them, because again, without bringing that technology to our organization, we wouldn't be where we are. But yeah, to your point, and it's funny, as I was listening to Judi talk earlier, our start with AR began at the beginning of the pandemic, right? So Paul, as a commercial education manager, had to reimagine how he was going to train his reps, right? Because they were locked in their homes. They couldn't come into the office in person and work with these large pieces of capital equipment. And so, we had to essentially figure out a way how we could simulate those hands-on experiences using some other solution. And then again, through the partnership with Gize, we ran through some testing and ran a pilot and discovered that the usage of the technology was actually quite effective, and gave us a way to bring our reps up the learning curve even faster than the traditional method, and certification scores increased and so on and so forth. So to your original question, it was like obvious that applying this for commercial education just as a new learning modality was clear. And really where we got our start. But I could talk to you about the evolution from there in terms of finding ways to use it for troubleshooting and engaging with our customers as a med tech organization. But that would probably take up the rest of our time here. And I don't want to bogart the whole time. So that's my short story there.
Yeah, no, thanks. And maybe this is to you, but also a conversation for everybody is, when you have so many kind of varying ideas of what it can be used for, and obviously whether it's like the end worker, whether it's leadership, whether it's management, how do you keep focused on like, this is the achievable end result that we're working towards, and being able to demonstrate that? How do you keep everyone kind of moving in that right direction? Is it like trying to prove value first and then socializing it? Is it supporting a number of use cases and seeing which ones work in terms of not only like value, but adoption? Is there something that you've thought about from that perspective? I guess that's open to everybody, of course.
If you're cool, I'll jump in on this one, gentlemen, and then we can go from there. I echo Jeff, and first of all, in the comment of I'm only here because luck and grace, but the work that was done by my colleagues at Beckman Coulter, Vinny DeBasi, and Julian and Lynn Thomas are the reason I'm sitting here today. But I think your question is interesting, David. And I think that my paradigm is very different, because if you remember, I came into this pre-pandemic. So I had no global push for why we were doing this, right? And so I sort of turn your question on its head, because I had to make a business case as to why. And for me, it was the ROI. It was the decision of, fine, boss, you want to do nothing, then I need 15 headcount. Or we can go try storm this. Right. And so there was a huge mountain of resistance, and there was some questions in the chat on this about that this could be possibly done. And so very early on, Julian would gather engineers in a room while we were creating the first modules, and then using that and their feedback to build that energy and that sort of internal demand, if you will, that created demand, right? But because of the scalable solution that Scope AR provides, I was able to frankly walk with leadership before I could run. And, the conversation in 2019 was a dramatically different conversation in March of 2020. So I hope that answers it and ties that in.
I like that answer. And if you don't mind, Judi, I'll add to it.
Please.
Some of the things that I look at from the perspective of implementing this technology is to try to avoid, saying this is going to solve all my problems. To try to take the big steps and try to implement it across the board on things, you need to start baby steps. This is technology a lot of people are used to. If they've ever played, any of the games on their phones, they've technically been using AR effectively. But we really had to start small. We thought, hey, we can implement this across production lines, put it with surgeries and whatnot. But we had to start thinking, okay, what are the low-hanging fruit? Things like onboarding employees, training somebody, telepresence. These things had to be done, and we had to do them in small scale. So here's a pilot, here's a proof of concept. But super important, as David was implying about socializing this. So we literally had to take these things on a world tour. Say, okay, this is what you're going to be doing. We had to really, pull in the voice of the customer to really understand what the needs and things were going on. So, building empathy with customer needs, building empathy with the doctors or even our production people, all of them were our customers. So we really had to start smaller with it.
Yeah, I was just going to add to what William is saying, right? Like, at least in our case, we had a very clear problem to solve. And so that sort of gave us the beginning or the genesis of being able to test with the application and then clearly articulate the value proposition or the ROI that we were achieving with that initial use case. And again, that sort of started us at least in a position where we could stand on that platform and then evaluate other use cases or other areas across the business where we could potentially exploit new use cases. So it's, to answer your question, David, to me, it's a little blend of each, right? Like, let's not boil the ocean right off the bat, but at least if you have a clear problem that you could solve for and that you can articulate how you're solving and why it's important to do it in that way, gives you a little bit of latitude, I think, with leadership and them being all right or actually encouraging you to look at other areas within the business to find those other value use cases.
Yeah, extremely important. And it's interesting, you're talking about kind of like a couple different layers here. You've obviously got finding a use case that you can show value to so that you can show to the worker that, or the person that's using it, this is why it's going to improve what you do. And this is why it's something that you're going to be interested in. That change management piece is really huge. But then you've got like that layer of leadership that's going, okay, great. What does this mean for us in a bigger picture? And then Jeff, as you know, and everybody knows from the IT side then too, you're like, okay, so now we've got more systems, we've got more tools. How does this all fit together into a seamless workflow that makes it easy for us as an organization to, to move towards and something that's going to be scalable? Yeah. How do you kind of like take all those moving parts and start to bring them together?
Well, interesting question. So not something that can be answered in a couple of sentences. If I'm being super honest, it's a kind of learn by fire. You figure things out as you go, and you implement solutions or figure out ways to integrate solutions as you're learning about it. Again, like anytime you're working with a new to an organization technology, these challenges will present themselves. And so having a team that's super agile and willing to like roll up their sleeves and get into the weeds with things is super helpful in sort of solving for, or I would say discovering and then solving for those challenges.
I like that question answer, Jeff. And just to add to that, I like carrying two phrases with me whenever I'm implementing new technology. One is the Einstein quote: "If you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough." And we can be considered as the super geeks in the world or whatever we want. I consider myself one of those. But we could easily talk over somebody's head. We could easily lose them. But how do we create this a relatable experience for them? How do we get them to understand what this means to them? So from that, I also added one last phrase. It's Mark Twain quote about if you're always telling the truth, you don't have to remember anything. So that transparency, that relatability, I think are the key things, at least from my perspective, it drives us to demystify this technology with our potential customers.
I think I echo you, Dr. Harding, in your comments. I would also add the phrase of under promise and over deliver. So the initial use case was reduce travel costs by not having to have engineers fly to travel to training centers. And we were extremely conservative. We did not promise any reduction in training time. We literally had the cost of the flight and the cost of the food versus not having to do that. It was sort of that zero sum. So I think, David, to your question, the under promising and over delivering, the transparency, everything that Jeff and Dr. Hardy mentioned previously. I think the other piece was, once you get past that initial proof case, the technology that Scope AR provides allows for many different possibilities. The power of the end user being the one to say, hey, did you guys know that you can do two-way video calling? And them driving some of the conversation. Now it's sort of that crowd feel of saying, hey, they've got something else. We don't have to get in the car and go to see a customer. We can just use the two-way video. That was just like a groundbreaking pivot point for us, because the training thing, clear. We made that ROI all day. That was, now we're starting to really change the game.
Mhm.
Yeah, if we're being honest, right? Like, that is the crux of true product development, right? Like, if we're getting the feedback from actual users on how they can benefit from a solution, like, that's the way we should be building solutions.
Exactly.
Yeah,
That's why I
absolutely.
feel that the voice of the customer aspect was super important. Especially, we think, I always think of people that, go develop something, like I said, in a black box, come back, 5 years, hey, I've solved all your problems. Like, no, you really need to. That's why I like falling back on things like the design thinking. You really need to engage individuals, fully understand, and help give them tools to help you fast iterate on solutions and things that will meet their immediate need, not the perceived need.
Yeah, I love the comment of under promising and over delivering, making sure that you have something that you can build value on right away. And also, as I think everyone's kind of mentioned, the idea of making sure that you've got a plan, though, that you've got the right key stakeholders involved, that they understand what this is going to look like as you start to move that next stage in terms of, I know, Dr. Harding, you mentioned the integrations as an example, as something that's going to be incredibly important. How do you actually tie the systems of record together? What does it look like in terms of the data that's collected, and how do you track that against a work or a piece of equipment? So understanding that, but focusing on something that's really easy is the wrong word, but really something that you can show value to rapidly seems to be the best path forward as far as your experiences.
Totally agree. And I think it's important to also consider that, when we think of, even as I think about designing things, I always think, it may not make logical sense, diversity, equality, inclusion. But when I think about the richness that, engaging everyone from whether careers, backgrounds, whatever geographic locations into the solution, it really allows me to create a better solution that's not going to just meet a specific niche need. So I always look for ways that I can engage, whether it's HR, quality, engineering, IT, regulatory, whatever, to make sure that I've got those voices, that I make sure I'm not just trying to plop something out there, that they have really no clue on how to implement or, validate pretty much.
For sure. So here's a question. We'll probably do one more kind of topic here. See if you have any thoughts on this. This is a little bit more of like a fun one. So I hope that nobody's going to hold your feet to the fire on this when I ask this. But if you had sort of a crystal ball and you were looking ahead 18 months and everything's going, really well, technology's advancing, there's a whole bunch of new hardware devices that are out. Any thoughts on what this could look like from, at any level, from use cases to organizational deployment? What is the vision, I guess, from your perspective 18 months from now?
Well, I have a dream.
There you go. And that's what it is.
One of the things I like quoting is one of the things we put in one of our books was when we're always looking for the next platform, I'll use an example in AR, a lot of people think it's only wearable. Well, we have implementations where AR had to be done on a tablet or phone, whatever. But when I'm talking in terms of future technology, wearable technology, a lot of people are focusing outward. We think of exoskeletons. We think of a lot of different wearable methods. But I've tried to encourage people to create, to envision the human body as the platform. And what I specifically go to is the intra-body communications, and specifically even things we're working, we're theorizing around vision prosthetics, or, methods to enhance, the sensory input. And you heard me earlier talk about my AI-enabled leg, how does, topographical mapping through a stereoscopic vision help feedback into my leg to help me navigate the environment? So thinking future-wise, I'm thinking at least in terms of a higher level of integration with the human itself.
Excellent. Any other visionary ideas, or just ideas of what this could look like down the road?
I think there's it's interesting, still working for the same parent company. I've switched from a medical device company to a very cutting edge genomics company as part of Danaher's family, and being on that forefront, that cutting edge of medicine right now, and realizing all of the back end softwares and processes we had to do to build our products. I'm hopeful for some form of an overlay where you're having the intersection between AR and more of software. From a perspective, I think that would just be absolutely explosive, both from a training and a use case and all kinds of other service per things. But that's on my Christmas list, or my wish list, as I say.
Yeah, I was just going to add to what Judi was saying there. I mean, like time boxing, it is really difficult, David, if I'm being super honest, but just like from a future looking conceptual perspective, the way I think about mixed reality technology is similar to when the internet first came out, or like smartphones first came out. Like as the content and the utility that can be derived from end users continues to increase, I think you'll see it become more and more socially acceptable as a tool or a technology. And and again, I'm speculating, but let's just say 5-10 years from now, as everything evolves, I could see a situation where people are wearing glasses such as mine that will interject digital information into their environment and help them, or change the way that they live, work, and pretty much consume entertainment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's great. And that was what it was about, just like, kind of what could this look like? And I think at some point, as technology becomes more accepted and it's adopted in just kind of the general way we do things, we're going to stop thinking about it as AR, as, oh, I'm going to use augmented reality for this. And it's just, I have hardware, I have software, just these things happen, right? Yesterday I was using an app that I had just where I looked up at some mountains and it showed me all the points of the mountain. I never thought, oh, look at the augmented reality that's showing me what these mountains are. They'll just be something that's natural to us. And so I'm thinking that's, sort of where I know it's reached that pinnacle, or that point of like really taking off, is when the adoption is just so easy. People stop thinking about what the technology is and they just use it. Right.
I like that statement, David. And to add to it, we do a program, within Medtronic around preceptorship, where we get into surgical environments, try to, build empathy, learn, create innovative solutions. And some of the recent technology, specifically AR, VR, and so on, used in surgery, it first has that novelty. It's like, wow, I'm looking through the robot. I'm seeing everything the doctor's doing. I'm able to annotate and do these things. But once you get past that novelty, and you start looking, okay, what is the tool he's using? What is the, why is that procedure being done? What could I do as an innovator to create solutions or systems or technology that would help the doctor? So like you said, getting past that novelty and getting to the, we'll say ease of use and usability aspects of it, that it becomes just a natural tool. And if you guys, to add to that point, if you've ever seen robotic surgeries, you can't see the patient. So what type of tools am I going to use to allow me, as if I'm training as an internist or a first year, to engage in so surgical training? What am I going to use? I have to use this type of technology if I want to really get the full experience and really see what's going on within the patient with what the doctor's doing and so on. So there's examples of, moving beyond the novel aspect and becoming just another tool that you're using.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was just going to say, I think to even take that a step further, like the novelty factor is there, sure, yeah. But I mean, if we're in a situation where leveraging this type of technology is improving patient outcomes, then there is no novelty. It's become standard of care because it's treating our patients better.
Yeah,
Good
I
point.
think to your point, Jeff, on the patient end, and I'm on that front end. If you're facilitating science, if you are driving innovation in a literally, lockstep way, it becomes, mission critical to business.
For sure.
Exactly.
So going from like kind of that crystal ball vision to bringing it right back down to the ground level, for those that are watching, I'm sure they're really curious if you were in their position and starting right now, and you had one recommendation. I think we've covered some of these, but what would be the one recommendation you might make to somebody who's, in those shoes right now of beginning that journey and beginning to say, this is something that we're going to invest in. What do I need to know?
Don't accept the first no.
Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I apologize, Dr. Harding. Don't accept the first no. That would be my number one. You're going to hear 1,000 of them. And, I think the number two is have fun with the technology, because the more you're having fun, the more you're selling it yourself. Those would be my top two, honestly.
And I like what you said there, because it kind of leads to, don't make this overly complex also. To me is, we love this technology, obviously, but if we look in terms of what it's providing us, if we think of a HoloLens as an example, I've got a digital keypad, I've got audio, I got visual overlays, the whole deal. It is in essence, and this is where we need to demystify it and remove kind of the wow factor and just get people used to this as a tool, is it's a display, it's a keyboard, it's a mouse, it's a monitor, and these type of things. So and I say that specifically because not just for the point of people accepting it as a tool, but when we run through quality or FDA inspections or certifications, it literally is just a tool. Don't make it more than it is. When you think of content that you would use for training on 2D content, basically on a document, it's still content management. When you think of devices you might use, like a mobile or phone or whatever, it's a BYOD model. You bring your device with you and you can use it. You make it intuitive. So not to make it overly complex, see it what it is. It'll be easier for when you're validating it. It'll be easier for people to accept it and move away from the gamification mentality of this, and see it as a professional tool.
The only other thing that I would have to add there is to do some research, understand what the technology is. I can't tell you how many times I have somebody come to me and tell me how cool our VR is. And I'm like, well, it's not actually what we're doing. We're doing augmented reality or mixed reality. And so understanding the distinction between all of the mixed reality platforms, solutions, and devices is like a good starting place. And then if you're focusing in on augmented reality, understanding what use cases have been sort of proven out there to have a strong ROI or value proposition associated with them. And then just go out to your business and find that problem area where something like this solution would fix that problem or enhance the problem or something along those lines. Because again, it's kind of easy to push forward with a technology when you can save money or you can enhance the way that we're doing business or so on and so forth. So I think that would be my advice.
The only thing I would add from the beginning of it that Jeff had noted is you got to surround yourself with good people. Mm-hmm. There is no underestimating for the power of the folks that are on this journey with you. And so don't shortchange yourself on that.
Yeah, those are all great points. I mean, have fun with it. Continue to be persistent. There's going to be people that will say it's not going to work, and here's why. But part of that is because it's new technology and it's scary, right? And so, as Dr. Harding's mentioned, demystifying that, making it something that's easily achievable in terms of using it in this use case, looking at hardware devices that make sense, right? In some cases, we look at things like the HoloLens, and it makes a lot of sense because we have, customers in really, really high value, really expensive use cases that they can take the time to learn how to use a HoloLens. In other cases, we have customers who maybe their workers aren't going to spend all that time learning and navigating something like a HoloLens, so make it easy for them on their handheld device. So kind of making it less scary, I guess, and part of that change management process. And also, like you said, Jeff, I think making sure that you can learn from what others have done that's successful and being able to implement those into what you're doing. So learn from others. And there's a lot of different ways to do that. I mean, something like this, having the group of you together, talking about what works, talking about some of the challenges, talking about the things that, you need to do to make sure you're going to be successful. Obviously, you can reach out to, XR specialists, people that have done this in your organizations as well as others. We have a community forum that you can go on to and start asking questions. Hopefully we can encourage people to say, this is what I'm doing, here's what I'm thinking of, getting other people to comment on what they're doing. So reaching out and learning from those that have already done this, you don't need to reinvent the wheel. So there's lots of great experience out there. So let's leverage that. Great advice. Thank you. Thank you very much. I know that we're probably at that point of getting close to looking at some of the questions. Unless there's anything that, like I said, open discussion here. Is there something that maybe you want to share, talk about, ideas that we haven't talked about yet?
The only thing I would add to what you just said, and I thought it was a great summary, is again, when it comes to things like this, it's not going to, it's not going to be an EHR, EMR type scenario where you've got some universal method of transferring data. You've got to start thinking about the technology integration. You got to think about interoperability, data exchange. And then key to that, I'm sure a lot of the people from my IEEE team would beat me about my head if I weren't to mention the data security, the protection. So trust, identity, privacy protection, safety, security. So following standards, because whether it's healthcare or what's IP, you need to protect that data. You need to protect those devices.
Yeah, and that certainly means something different for every organization, right? So it's something that you need to make sure that you get people from your teams involved in sooner than later. So if it's working with a vendor like us, going through what those requirements are, making sure that we meet those security requirements, filling out the questionnaires. In some cases, that might mean that being on a cloud hosted environment is perfectly fine. In other cases, that might mean that you need to be on something like a private cloud or a full on-prem. So, we certainly have different examples of different customers who are approaching that in different ways based on their requirements. But the integrations is, like you said, that's really important to understand that this all ties together into, what is the digital thread? What is the story in terms of when a worker does something, how that data is collected, and where it goes from there. So even though, like you said, starting with something simple that's achievable, that you can measure, but making sure you talk about and understand and involve the right stakeholders as to where this is going, at the next stage is critically important. So thank you for that.
David, why don't we move on to some of the questions, because the Q&A box is amazing in its content. So we'll start with some of those if you guys are all right.
Fantastic.
So first one here from Kristen, looking for the best use case examples. Which instances should I look to maximize the first product or organization for visibility, ROI, et cetera? Great question, Kristen. Any takers?
Yes, sure. So I will say for sure in the education space and training space has been sort of our bell cow up to this point. I think digital work instruction is the next one that I've sort of circles around in my head. So like on-premises digital work instruction where the end user is doing something in their physical environment that we can enhance their ability to do that. That's the one that sort of like circles in my head when I'm drifting off to bed. So to me, again, our focus has been in the education and training area, but I think if I were to move forward or not if I were, as I am, moving into that new area, that's the one that I think is probably the next best value, at least in our organization.
And adding to what Jeff said there, I think it was a really great point, is we had these highfalutin or high lofty type ideas that we were going to do. And it really it wasn't sexy. It was education, training, onboarding. It was simply that point. And to accomplish that, to get that in place, was literally the first seed. We thought, oh wow, we're going to be doing any sort of other super designs and stuff. But ultimately, if I even think in terms of a production person assembling a part and be able to see the digital twin, to be able to say, okay, this is the right component. You're getting audio, you're getting video content, you're getting 3D content in your spatial or field of view that's helping guide you. We've already seen the positive outcomes of that. So I really like what you said there, Jeff.
My only Oh, I apologize. Go ahead.
No, it's just we've got so many questions to get to. I think this one might be great for you to answer, Judi, and perhaps others. Ankita asks if we need FDA or other regulatory approval for medical procedures and similar technology. Great question, Ankita.
Yeah, I mean, I'll talk from the medical device space. It was well audited by the FDA, and we were following our policies and procedures, and we had them defensibles. We had zero issue from that point.
I would offer, however, it depends on if you're storing data or making management decisions from the devices. So if I'm not storing like an eGPU, if I'm just using it to enhance processing capability, then the approval for it is going to be minimalized. So when it comes to thinking about what you're doing with the device, if you're just using its telepresence and you're not storing or patient data or product data or IP, you're going to probably have an easier time to any sort of FDA approval.
Has anyone, this is a question from Nirajan, hope I pronounced that okay. What tools do you recommend to capture the translation of the skills learned? It's an interesting question.
We use the intersection of the LMS. So
Okay.
that, I mean, that, and then you all had developed the quizzing and the skilling right inside the tool. So I look for, when I was in a regulated environment, I really appreciated having the record in the LMS. That was my go-to for that.
Yeah, I was just going to mention that so our team actually developed some separate data and analytics capabilities where we were able to synthesize some of the data that we were pulling out of the Scope AR system. And then also actually created an API connection into our LMS so that we could sort of transfer, like if one of our reps went through one of the scenarios and completed it and could achieve quiz results if we needed to, and then have that come back through the LMS. But yeah, I mean, it depends on what your business, and again, I'm situated in IT, but it depends on what your business needs in terms of insights and stuff. Like there are ways to take the raw data on the Scope AR system and synthesize it in a way and visualize it in a way that it makes sense for the folks that need it.
Yeah, great, Jeff. Thank you. Good question from Michael. What are some unexpected lessons you've learned? I think there's been quite a few, but I want to give it a little bit of airtime. Unexpected lessons.
I would say
go ahead, Jeff, after you.
Yeah, I was just going to say this to me, when we first started working in this space, it was just so obvious, the potential that was there. And I guess, it's not viewed the same way for a plethora of different reasons by senior leaders in some cases, or people that you're engaging with. So what I thought was going to be like an easier path to follow actually had more hurdles and speed bumps along the way than I anticipated.
I would add that if you build it, they won't come. So I say that kind of tongue in cheek because it's like what we inferred earlier, that we don't have a solution looking for a problem, and so, when some of the unexpected things, our enthusiasm, our energy was, oh, this is going to be, this is going to be world changing. And we really had to take a step back. We had to humble ourselves a little bit. We had to really listen to what those needs were and not try to force it into a solution. So I would say that was kind of the unexpected lessons we had.
I think you cannot underestimate the power of one leader. It was literally one woman who made one decision to support it back in December of 2018, which transformed the true history of training at that medical device company. That's what I would say.
Yeah, those are all similar types of comments and conversations that we've had with all of our customers. I mean, having a technology and looking for a home is not the answer. I mean, you need to be starting with a problem. And to your point, Judi, that somebody is committed to solving and saying, this is really important for us, and here's what it's going to look like moving forward. And the technology is just a tool that's going to help solve that problem. So those are all incredibly important, like you said, lessons and things that you encountered. And like you said, Jeff, it's going to take time. I mean, it's not that everyone's just going to jump on board and go, this is amazing, because there's a lot of work when you're implementing a new technology. There's a lot of moving pieces. So show value, start to build up momentum, find the right use cases, and demonstrate those, socialize those, right? Make it something that you can't stop because it's just too important.
Great question from Eric Johnson. Can you talk about the skill set required for your team to use Scope AR's no-code creation tools? Or have you manually paid Scope AR to build the content? Really interesting.
Well, I started out by saying it was easy enough, Judi could do it, so we could just start there. But we had folks with instructional at the very early stages. It was basic instructional design experience that they had. They took to the technology within about a week. They were up and running and independent. I mean, that was their background. With the way that the relationship was at the time, we did not have Scope AR create anything for us in the early stages. So used temp instructional designers at the very early stages.
And as for us, we do a hybrid model. We like to train our individuals to be experts effectively, or super experts. So, though we have a lot of people highly skilled in, all aspects of XR, to work with the partner, you guys know the tools better, to learn from you, to have that train the trainer type mentality was the best way for us to accomplish the goal.
The only thing I would add is similar to Dr. Harding's situation, where we started leveraging Scope AR's developers, at least at the beginning, and then have sort of formed a small team around developing new use case, or new scenarios, I should say, for our business partners. One of the things I would mention is that there's two components of the development of the experiences, and one is actually leveraging the developer tool on the application, but the other one is the modeling component, which, in our case, at least in my organization, is not always the cleanest or most simple of situations when, sometimes we're starting off with our models as drawings on a napkin versus full scale CAD models. So there's a little bit of expertise involved, at least for us, in terms of making sure the models are well made and optimized to deploy on the application. But I would say the developer tool is quite easy, actually.
Great. So many questions here to choose from. Folks, I'm not gonna be able to get to all of them. That's just the sad reality here.
Robert, the ones that aren't, we can't answer live here. Are we going to be able to follow up on those afterwards?
100%. That's definitely the case. You have many options to get a hold of us. Those of you that are asking questions, I'm basically answering that you can always go to scopear.com/contact and either ask a question. We pay very close attention to the inbox, or even just book a meeting with us directly. We have a few more questions here I want to get to. Is bringing hardware into the clinical environment logistically challenging? Really interesting.
It can be. It can be, actually. If you think of, I'll use an example of HoloLens in the industrial version. And we said, okay, it's got an ISO IEC standard, and it's followed a specific ISO IEC standard. In that case, it was combustibles, though I wasn't really concerned so much about that. But in ESD, when I'm thinking electrostatic discharge or around sensitive equipment, when I think of the safety of the person wearing them, as an example, what if my technician or what if a doctor, was leaning in? We've got blood splatter, we've got other things in specific environments. We've got equipment that we might be close to that we might be impacting. So besides the capability of, besides the individual device itself, but also when you think of, you're in healthcare environments, it's like a Faraday cage. Your ability to communicate is nil. To have the appropriate hardware is not something you can just plop in there and say, can it work? It'll work and take care of things. But one of the key points a lot of people miss is the infrastructure, the key elements. So you have this really cool headset, you're in surgery for an hour and a half or 2 hours. And what's the power consumption on the headset? Roughly about 2 hours. So what do you do? So having the right infrastructure, whether it's a tethered power supply or a backup system, these type of configurations, even if it's a backup router, you really make sure you've got that correct infrastructure ready to go.
Yeah, Nicole Fontoursi actually asked a similar question about Wi-Fi. I'm sure, Jeff, I saw you nodding there on that particular issue.
Yeah, I mean, not every Wi-Fi connection is created equal in a hospital facility. So that's not, I mean, just a plethora of challenges that you have to tackle, as Dr. Harding was highlighting. So yeah, I would say, at least from my background, not an easy proposition for sure.
Related on this is security and data storage. I don't think we covered that today. Certainly with patient data, it gets very sensitive.
But we did touch a little bit on it with the TIPS scenario, the trust identity, privacy protection, safety, security. So when you are thinking in terms of, how to protect the data, again, the most secure system is a system you can't use. So it's not like we're going to be able to create a black box that is impervious to any sort of attacks. But at least if you've done your due diligence to make sure the accidental aspects, and I encourage a lot of people to look at the IEEE P2933 standards around this, around how to integrate technology that works as part of a system. So when we think about, like Jeff had referred to as far as wireless communications, methods of data transfer, think about data storage effectively, validated repositories of secure environments, even blockchain. If we look at that aspect of it, blockchain's a wonderful solution, but some of the major barriers are the cost prohibitive, interoperability, some of the other aspects associated with it. So there is, though we think of blockchain being a common method of data protection, distributed systems or decentralized ways or federated data effectively, but in reality, it's not standard across the board. So there's really got to be a lot of consideration when you're looking at not just implementing, but how you're transferring that data, how you're storing that data, and then how you're ultimately protecting and even archiving and decommissioning it.
Excellent. I want to take a quick moment and advertise our next webinar coming up while we still have quite a few folks on the line. We have, I think, just 1 minute left. So late March, we're going to host Mitsubishi Heavy Industries, and we're going to look about how they revolutionize time to AR. If you have a phone, pull out your camera, fire it up, and you can register right here with this QR code. And we'll be promoting that through similar channels as well. Want to say a big thank you to everyone for attending, but most importantly, a big thank you to our panelists, Jeff, Judi, Dr. Harding. It's been a great pleasure to have you guys at this particular webinar. I see tons of positive feedback in the questions and chat box. Been just a huge pleasure. As everyone can see, it's quite a bit of information to unpack, to digest, but it's a process. And thank you again to David for hosting this so beautifully. Any final comments, thoughts?
Wonderful session. Thanks for running it.
Great.
And just thank you for the continued partnership in Scope AR. Really appreciate it.
Thank you all for participating. Really appreciate it. And for all the attendees.
Thanks, everyone.
We will be, obviously we have recorded this. We'll be distributing that as soon as we get approvals. If you haven't tried Scope AR, definitely try that with this QR code here. And just one more reminder, you can drop questions or book a meeting at any time at scopear.com. Thank you guys so much, and we'll see you at the next one. Cheers.
Excellent. Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.